lost broadcast. I used to think the loneliest sound in the world was dead air. That soft, uninterrupted hiss rising out of the monitors when no one is speaking, when no signal is coming through, when the station itself seems to be holding its breath. But after what happened at KBRX 12, I learned something worse. Silence that replaces a sound that should be there. Silence where voices used to be. Silence that waits. My shift started the way it always did, just before midnight, pulling into the gravel lot behind the station with a thermos of burnt coffee and a backpack full of stale snacks I'd regret eating before the night was over. KBRX was a rural station, the sort of old red brick broadcast building you'd imagine in a town no one remembers passing through. A communications relic built sometime in the 70s, never renovated, never modernized, beyond what the FCC forced them to update. Half the equipment was older than me. The other half felt like it wanted to be. I was the overnight technical operator, the graveyard shift keeper, as the morning anchor called it, responsible for making sure our pre-recorded segments aired correctly, verifying tower output, logging every hour, and handling EAS alerts if the system ever needed me to. 90% of the job was waiting, watching lights blink, listening to the soft hum of the transmitter feed, making sure weather reports and local ads went through without hiccups, making sure the station didn't fall silent. The front door's hydraulic hinge always wheezed like a dying accordion. I stepped inside, locked it behind me, and inhaled the familiar scent of dust mixed with old cables and reheated coffee. Everything in that place smelled like it belonged on the set of a 70s disaster film. The newsroom was dark, except for the glow of the emergency exit signs. Papers were left scattered on desks, a half-eaten sandwich abandoned on the weather anchor's counter. Typical day shift chaos. But the booth, my domain, was always a different kind of quiet, a cleaner one. Only the lights I needed were on, 2 small lamps over the console, the muted warmth of CRT monitors humming in slow, pulsing flickers. The automation's schedule rolled smoothly across the main screen, giving me the rundown for the next 6 hours. Local ads, late-night jazz, an interview replay, and a pre-recorded community announcement. Nothing unusual. Nothing demanding. That was the thing about night shifts. Nothing ever happened. Until it did. I hung my jacket on the chair, booted up the logging terminal, and took my seat in front of the mixing board. Outside, the wind moaned across the empty parking lot and over the chain-link fence surrounding the satellite dish. The dish wasn't even in use anymore. Just a giant, pale bowl staring permanently upward, like it was waiting for something the station no longer received, or something that wasn't meant for us to receive. For the first hour, everything moved like clockwork. The jazz program drifted through the monitors like warm fog. I checked levels, adjusted the gain on a couple of ad breaks, and poured myself coffee that tasted like rust. Near 1:03 a.m., I performed the usual automated EAS test. Quick tone, check, verify, log. All green, all normal. Then the building made its usual nighttime noises. The slow contraction of old wood, the metallic ticking of cooling air ducts, the faint rattle of something loose inside the ceiling tiles that everyone insisted wasn't mice. I was used to it. Some nights, the sounds even felt comforting, familiar in their repetition. Nothing supernatural, nothing eerie, just the soundtrack of an old building trying not to fall apart. I didn't even notice the strange thing at first. It was the tiniest detail. A flicker on the corner monitor, where the EAS input readings displayed. Nothing alarming, nothing that would make someone jump. Just the little red bar blinking once when it shouldn't have. Then again, a single blink and you miss it pulse. I frowned and leaned closer. The system wasn't receiving an alert. There were no weather warnings, no amber alerts, no civil signals. Nothing should have blinked. I tapped the side of the monitor gently. Sometimes the old screens flickered when the humidity was bad or when the heating kicked on too hard. The blinking stopped. I shrugged, logged a note to have the engineering guy take a look at it in the morning, and leaned back in my chair. Then, out of nowhere, the automation screen froze. Not a full crash, just a half-second stutter, like someone had grabbed the running program by the throat. The music cut out for that same half-second, leaving true dead air behind it. When the jazz resumed, the tempo was slightly off, just a hair slower, as though the system was catching its breath. I stared at the console. Okay, I muttered under my breath. Don't start this tonight. But the logs showed no errors, no warnings, nothing out of the ordinary. And in a building as old as KBRX, strange hiccups happened. The system was practically analog in spirit, even when the parts were digital. Still, something in the room felt heavier. A tension. The kind you feel during a lightning storm, right before the clouds split open. Except the sky outside was clear. The night was calm. I shook it off and checked the transmitter output. Everything seemed fine. The tower status lights were steady, the antenna readings normal, the power flow stable, no dropouts. The stillness crept back slowly, landing on my shoulders like dust. Then the EAS monitor blinked again. This time, it didn't stop. Slow, steady, red, red, red. No tone played, no alert began, just the blink, pulsating in a rhythm that almost resembled a heartbeat. I leaned close again, watching it reflect faintly off the console metal. No alerts were active. The system wasn't receiving anything. So why? A soft click whispered through my headset. Not part of the music, not part of the broadcast chain. More like someone had plugged in a cable somewhere deep inside the system, a connection being made, or answered. My breath stalled as I listened. The click repeated. Then again, a pattern. 3 clicks, a pause. 3 clicks again. I knew that pattern. Every operator does. It's the series a station sends right before an emergency alert breaks into scheduled programming. But we weren't sending anything. We weren't receiving anything. The system was waking itself. I straightened slowly, hands hovering over the console, pulse flickering in my throat. The lights in the booth seemed to dim just the slightest bit, like something in the wires was feeding off the power. Then the EAS terminal changed. A line of text appeared on the screen. Unauthorized signal received. Source unknown. Priority maximum. My breath left in a cold rush. Because I knew, absolutely, without a doubt, that no such classification existed in our system. There were no maximum priority alerts. There wasn't even a category for unknown source. And nothing at all should have been able to override the station. Not from the outside, not from anywhere. But the signal was coming through anyway, and it wasn't waiting for permission. For a full 5 seconds, I just stared at the screen. The words didn't make sense, not in any technical framework I'd ever learned, and certainly not from a system older than half the staff. The EAS terminal wasn't designed to communicate uncertainty. It did not have room for improvisation. It didn't guess. If it received an alert, it decoded it. If it didn't, it simply remained silent. Yet that line pulsed on the display, the cursor blinking beneath it like a single, impatient eye. Unauthorized signal received. Source, unknown. Priority, maximum. I hovered my hand over the manual override switch. Part of me felt foolish. The station wasn't actually broadcasting an alert yet. Another part of me, a deeper and older part of my brain, whispered that touching anything right now would be the wrong move entirely. Before I decided, the studio lights flickered. Just once. Enough to make my skin tighten. A faint pop cracked through the monitor speakers, followed by a soft layer of static rolling underneath the jazz. Not the usual hiss of dead air static, but something coarser, like a worn-out cassette being dragged across a magnetic head. Then the music cut. Silence swallowed the booth. I didn't move. My reflection stared back at me from the console's darkened glass, dim and uncertain. A low hum crawled out of the speakers. Not electrical interference. The tower wasn't struggling. This was different. A droning, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate behind my ears rather than through them. A tone that didn't match any EAS frequency I knew. The EAS terminal printed more text across the screen. Decoding, decoding, decoding. Lines of nonsensical characters spilled across the display. Symbols, broken fragments, unreadable noise. Then they stopped abruptly, replaced by one word: received, and the speakers screamed. A digital tone slammed through the booth so loudly, I ripped off my headset and stumbled back into the equipment rack. But this wasn't a tone I recognized. Not the standard EAS preamble. Not even an off-frequency one. It was low, drawn out, discordant, almost like multiple tones layered incorrectly over each other, fighting for dominance. Underneath it, buried in the distortion, something else moved. Something that sounded almost like a voice, but not speaking, just breathing. The tone warped again, rising in pitch until it became an agonized electrical howl. The studio lights flashed in jagged pulses, synced to the sound. Even the floor seemed to vibrate. Then the tone cut out mid-scream, and a voice replaced it. At first it was buried under static, a faint murmur, a rhythm of syllables that didn't form words. I leaned forward instinctively, every part of my brain screaming not to, but curiosity welding me in place. The static thinned for a breath. Then it spoke clearly.
KBRX12. Receiving.
It said the station's name. It said it like it knew me. My mouth went dry. I swallowed the way someone does when they realize they've wandered too far from the path. The tone was not synthetic. It wasn't a flattened, mechanical EAS voice. It had texture, uneven breaths, air moving through teeth, the resonance of an actual throat, a human one. But the cadence was wrong, like it was mimicking speech patterns instead of producing them, like the words were recited, not understood. Then it spoke again.
Do not adjust your set. Do not attempt to terminate the broadcast. Remain tuned.
A chill uncoiled at the base of my spine. I looked at the console. The override switches were locked, physically locked. I hadn't seen them do that before. The toggle wouldn't budge under my thumb. The voice continued.
Copy confirmation. 1.
Static swelled, swallowing the voice. Then,
Copy confirmation. 2.
the volume increased. Something shifted in the static, like scraping, like dragging.
Copy confirmation. 3.
My lungs hitched. I don't know why, but something about the way it counted felt wrong. Not just uncanny, intentional. Each number landed like a test, like it was expecting something from me. The static thinned a final time. Then the voice whispered directly into the mic feed, barely audible.
We hear you. Do you hear us?
Every hair on my arms prickled. I reached out and slammed my palm against the emergency kill switch, the failsafe that cuts all outgoing signal from the station by physically severing the feed until manually reset. Nothing happened. The signal didn't even flicker. Instead, the EAS screen changed again. Live input detected. Source verified. Relaying broadcast. My heart hammered. Verified by what? By who? The voice returned, now deeper, more textured, as though closer. Too close.
This message is for the operator, the one awake, the one listening.
I froze. The hiss of static fell away, until the voice was the only sound in the room.
Do not leave your post. Do not open the door behind you. Do not attempt to contact your superiors.
My breath stuttered. The booth door was behind me. I hadn't heard it open, but the cold that slid across my shoulders told me something changed in the room's air. Not movement, absence. Like the darkness beyond the doorframe had thickened, waiting for acknowledgement. The voice continued.
Remain attentive. Message follows. Do not look behind you.
I took a step away from the console before my brain caught up with me. No, not away. Toward the door. Toward whatever I was being warned about, or guided toward. The voice lowered, not threatening. Patient.
This is a priority transmission. You are required to receive it. We have been waiting for a clear channel. We have been waiting for you.
For me, my hands trembled. Sweat gathered at my collarbone. The air in the booth felt colder the longer I listened. Cold in a way temperature didn't explain. Cold like the heat was being pulled from the room by something breathing just beyond the edge of the lights. Then, the broadcast shifted. A new sound filtered through the speakers. Faint, distant, like wind moving through a hollow space. But too rhythmic to be wind. It rose gradually, growing clearer until it resembled a crowd. A crowd murmuring wordlessly, hundreds of overlapping voices whispering in a subterranean chorus. I pressed my palms against the console, fighting the instinct to shut my eyes. The whispers built until individual phrases bubbled to the surface. Fragments, half sentences, flickers of language I sometimes recognized and sometimes didn't.
Crossed the line. They're not speaking to us. He can hear it, can't he? Open the door. Open it.
Open!
The static surged violently, cutting them off. The original voice returned.
Operator, remain calm. You are now tuned to channel 619 Hz. Do not attempt manual adjustment. Your compliance ensures your safety.
My voice finally broke free, a rasped whisper. "Who are you?" For a moment, the transmission went dead still. No static, no tone, just silence, as though everything on the other end paused. Then it answered, not with a name, not with a designation, with a sound, a slow, deep inhalation, like something enormous had just leaned close to the microphone. I staggered back, bumping into the equipment rack. The booth door rattled lightly, as though someone pressed against it from the outside, not trying to force their way in, not knocking, just leaning, listening. The voice grew thick, distorted, intimate.
We are the final broadcast. We are the last message. We are what remains when transmission ends.
A cold pressure settled behind me, matching the weight of that voice. And then,
Operator, do not look behind you. This is your only warning.
the temperature plunged. A faint shadow moved across the reflective surface of the console. Not mine. And the voice whispered, softer.
Stay with us. You have already been tuned.
The studio door handle clicked, slowly, deliberately. Something was trying to turn it. The broadcast grew louder, drowning the room in static and layered voices as the handle continued to twitch and the air pressed tight around me, thick, suffocating, electric. Then the voice, almost tender.
Act 2 complete. Remain for Act 3. Do not leave the booth. Do not look.
The handle stopped. The booth fell silent, except the transmission, still waiting, still breathing. The silence after the handle stopped turning felt worse than the noise, worse than the voice, worse than the static that seemed to crawl back into whatever machine nightmare it came from. Silence, total, absolute, insulating, settled around me. A kind of dead air I'd never heard before. Real dead air wasn't quiet. Radio silence always had some faint hum beneath it. This had nothing, like the room was sealed in vacuum. I didn't want to breathe. Breathing felt like it would draw attention. My eyes stayed locked on the console readouts, even though the screen had frozen on that final instruction, still pulsing faintly. Act 2, complete. Remain for Act 3. Do not leave the booth. Do not look. The cursor blinked like a slow heartbeat. The emergency override toggles, still locked. The kill switch, still dead. I checked the digital encoder, the transmitter interface, the patch panel, everything frozen. It was as if the studio had handed control of itself to whatever was speaking, or whatever was listening. A soft tick echoed from inside the wall, then another, a sequence tapping out in slow, irregular rhythm, not like pipes cooling, not like wiring settling, more deliberate, like someone pressing a finger against the drywall and dragging it downward. Tick, tick, tick. The overhead light dimmed. Then the broadcast returned, not with a tone, but with a faint crackle, the sound of an old VHS tape unspooling. A grainy audio bed washed into the booth, layered with the faint flutter of warped magnetic tape. Beneath it, someone shifted. Not close, not in the mic, but somewhere deep, far from the surface of the signal. A man's voice broke through, weak, strained, like he'd been whispering for far too long.
Is this running? God, I don't know. I don't know what they want. If this ever reaches someone, anyone, please.
Another shift, something brushing fabric. The man breathed hard.
They can hear me. They hear everything. I shouldn't be talking. They said I shouldn't talk. They said the operator listens. They said he listens too closely.
My stomach clenched. The voice gathered itself.
It's not a malfunction. Do you hear me? It's not a malfunction. If you work in broadcast, if you work in any transmission facility, if you touch anything that sends a signal, leave. Don't wait for protocol. Don't wait for a replacement. Don't wait for the next shift.
A scrape, like something heavy dragged on concrete. Then a second voice, closer to the mic, deeper, unsteady.
You're not supposed to warn them.
The man choked. A gasp, a stifled plea. The deeper voice whispered,
Turn it off.
a thud, something collapsing, a mechanical click, then nothing but tape hiss. I felt sweat roll down my spine. Not warm, cold. A cold that came from inside. The speakers buzzed, just a single short pop, and the familiar voice, the one that had spoken directly to me before, bled through.
Operator, new message follows. Remain attentive.
Something shifted again inside the wall. Faster this time. More deliberate. The transmission continued.
You will now receive Act 3. Prepare your voice. Prepare your memory. You are needed for documentation. Your testimony will be archived.
My heart lurched. My testimony. Before I could react, the booth lights cut out completely. The only illumination came from the EAS screen. A pale, sickly glow. The speakers whispered.
Act 3. Recognition.
Static swelled slowly, like a tide rolling in. At first it was shapeless, but gradually, through some unnatural pattern, it began forming a droning, rising pitch that resolved itself into words, spoken so quietly I almost didn't catch them.
He's sitting now. Same room, same position. He's listening. He hears us.
The whispering voices weren't speaking to me. They were speaking about me. The air thickened, my throat tightened. I pressed myself back against the console just to feel something solid, something real. The voice layered itself into a single, unified tone again.
Operator, describe your surroundings.
My pulse pounded. This felt like a trap. But before I could refuse, the booth door handle clicked again, and the wood flexed inward, bowing slightly as though something pressed against it. Not turning the knob this time, pushing. The voice repeated,
Describe your surroundings. Failure to comply will result in manual observation.
A cold breath passed behind me. Not air, not draft. Something else. Like proximity without form. I swallowed hard. The booth, I whispered. The studio booth. KBRX. The air conditioner's off. The lights are out. I'm alone. The static shifted, curious.
Define alone.
Pressure built behind my ears, like the air itself was leaning closer to hear my answer. I mean, no one else is in the room. A pause. A longer pause, then...
Incorrect. Act 3 continues.
The speakers emitted a low, metallic rumble, the kind of noise you hear in the belly of a broadcast tower during a thunderstorm. Deep, resonant, old. It rose slowly until it felt like it was vibrating through my ribs. The voice spoke beneath it.
Operator, describe the figure behind you.
My entire body locked. There's nothing behind me. The rumble grew louder, the voice sharpened.
Describe it. Now!
My breath hitched. The cold behind me concentrated, like a presence had condensed inches from the back of my neck. My eyes burned from the effort not to look. There's nothing there, I whispered. The EAS screen flickered violently, distorting the text into grotesque symbols. The voice lowered into something almost like disappointment.
Operator, you have failed the recognition test. Observation will proceed. Remain stationary. Do not look away from the console. Do not move. Do not speak.
Something touched the back of my shirt. Not a hand. Not fingers. Cold. Flat. Curious. It pressed against my spine through the fabric with slow, investigative motions, almost like it was trying to understand the shape of a human body. My eyes stung. The voice whispered through the static. Observation commencing.
Act 3, nearing completion.
A faint, low tremor rolled across the booth floorboards, as though something very heavy shifted its weight on the other side of the door, or inside the walls. Then something brushed my ear. I flinched, couldn't help it. But before I could jerk away, the voice boomed through the speakers with sudden sharpness.
Do not move!
I froze. The presence leaned closer still, breathless, soundless. The cold shape touched my neck, just the lightest pressure, and then it mimicked me. My exact voice, my exact cadence, whispering, "There's nothing behind me." My stomach twisted. The shape withdrew, not fully, just enough to stop touching me. The broadcast hissed one long exhale.
Act 3, complete. Prepare for final transmission. Remain compliant.
The cold behind me slowly dissipated, like mist evaporating. The booth felt marginally less suffocating, but not safer. The speakers fell silent for several long seconds before the voice returned, now distorted, layered, fractured, like multiple versions of itself speaking over each other.
Act 4, integration. Operator, remain calm. Your station has been selected.
The EAS terminal began printing new text. Not scrolling, printing. As if connected to a thermal printer it didn't have. Paper emerged slowly from a slot that had never existed before, curling out like a tongue. I didn't touch it. The voice explained.
A record is required. A record of the final operator. A record of the final broadcast. K-Boo RX will be among the first documented sites.
The paper kept printing. I watched line after line emerge, each filled with dense, trembling symbols, like someone had attempted to write while freezing. More text printed. Operator status verified. Signal lock permanent. Exit disabled. Observation active. Preparation begin. My throat tightened. Preparation for what? The speakers crackled.
Integration.
Then the lights blinked back on, dim, flickering, sickly, and I saw the booth reflected in the console's dark glass, but not exactly as it was. Behind me, something stood in the reflection. Tall, thin, bent at the wrong places, its limbs too long, its face a blur of static where features should be, a shape like a stretched silhouette shimmering like heat haze. But when I spun around, nothing. Just the door, just the empty wall, just the booth. The reflection was lying. The EAS screen hissed with white noise, then resolved. Do not trust reflections. They see differently. They see ahead. The shadow in the reflection moved again, closer this time. Just a fraction. Just enough to let me know it was aware of me watching it. The voice whispered, "Operator."
Do you acknowledge the observer?
I couldn't speak. Acknowledge.
It is required.
My mouth worked without sound before I managed. I acknowledge it. Static surged.
Integration continues. Remain composed.
The shadow in the reflection leaned down, slowly, until its head hovered inches above my reflected shoulder. I felt nothing, but the reflection showed otherwise. The voice resumed.
Step 1, mirrored alignment. Step 2, vocal synchronization. Step 3, signal inheritance.
The reflection's mouth split open, wide, jagged, a rip through static. I heard nothing, but the console meters spiked as though a deafening scream had filled the room. Then the booth lights went out again. Total darkness. I heard breathing, not mine, not human. Slow, wet. Inhalations that stretched far too long. The speakers whispered,
Do not move. Do not breathe. Integration requires stillness.
A soft pressure pressed against my chest, like a hand flattening itself over my sternum. I gasped before I could stop myself. The breathing stopped. Everything stopped. Then, a whisper inches from my ear.
Too late.
The pressure slammed into me with force, shoving me backward into the console. Equipment rattled. The entire booth shook. I screamed. The broadcast drowned me out with a roar of static.
Non-compliance detected. Initiating manual overwrite.
The air turned electric, charged, buzzing with invisible frequencies. My vision flickered, disorienting bursts of light like someone flipping a strobe inside my skull. The voice, deeper than before, filled the room.
Operator, you will be silent. You will listen. You will repeat.
What do you want from me? Silence. Then,
Your voice.
a violent, thunderous crack split through the studio speakers, like a tower grounding lightning directly into the building. A shockwave of low frequency punched through my chest. The console screen scrambled. The broadcast monitors bled frames of warped imagery. Faces, landscapes, towers, distorted figures crawling across grainy analog static. A flood of visual noise. A flood of sound. A flood of instruction. The voice boomed.
Repeat.
I clamped my hands over my ears. My voice broke. I can't.
Repeat.
The reflection in the glass opened its mouth again, wider, unnaturally wide, as though urging me to mimic it. The room pulsed with pressure. I screamed the only thing I could think of. What do you want me to say? Instant silence. Then the voice whispered, calm now.
Say, I hear you.
My heartbeat hammered.
Say it, and integration will complete peacefully. Refuse, and we proceed manually.
The booth door creaked. Something heavy pressed against it from the outside, straining the hinges. The reflection moved again. I clenched my jaw and said, I hear you. The cold vanished instantly, blown out like a candle. The lights snapped back on. The reflection froze. The console reset. The speakers clicked quietly as though settling after a long broadcast. The voice returned, soft, satisfied. Operator, integration complete. You have been received. My breath shook. What happens now?
Now, you relay.
The studio door unlocked with a click. The broadcast ended. The hiss faded. The hum of the tower returned. And everything went quiet. I didn't move for almost a full minute. When I finally gathered enough courage to approach the door, my hand hovered over the knob. Then I saw it. On the inside surface of the booth window, a smear of static, shaped like a handprint. On the inside of the glass, I left the booth. I should have run straight out of the building. I should have abandoned the station entirely. But my legs carried me down the hall toward the main control room, where the master transmitter and distribution panels were located. Every monitor was on, every single one. And they were all showing me, live, from angles that shouldn't exist, corners of the studio without cameras, viewpoints from inside walls, overhead, beneath the floorboards. Each feed stamped with white text. Operator received the signal inherited. I backed away. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. KBRX12. Your shift has begun. Do not leave your post. Begin relay. We hear you. I dropped my phone. It buzzed again, and again, and again. Every message, just one sentence. You hear us. The building groaned, a deep structural sound like metal bending. I ran down the hall, past the empty offices, toward the exit. The lobby lights flickered as I approached. The glass door, my only way out, fogged from the inside. Letters appeared in the condensation, as if traced by an invisible fingertip. We hear you. Stay on the air. The door wouldn't open, not locked, just wouldn't move. A low rumble traveled through the floor beneath me. I turned around. Down the hallway, near the booth, the lights were turning off, one by one, advancing toward me, each bulb snapping into darkness like a countdown. The broadcast speakers, station-wide, crackled to life. A voice whispered through all of them at once. My voice. Operator. Return to the booth. The broadcast continues. Do not leave the building again. We hear you. Do you hear us? I staggered backward until my shoulders pressed against the unmoving glass exit. My phone buzzed once more. A single new message. Look behind you. I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. But something moved in the reflection on the door. Something tall. Something waiting. Something leaning in close behind my shoulder, closer than breath. I turned. I didn't scream. Not because I was brave. I didn't scream because the breath left my lungs entirely. because the thing standing behind me wasn't one thing. It was dozens of overlapping shapes, all slightly out of sync, like frames from old footage layered imperfectly over each other. Silhouettes stretched too long, faces blurred into static, bodies flickering into and out of alignment, all leaning toward me, all watching, all smiling with mouths that never stopped opening. The broadcast whispered from every direction.
Relay, 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 relay.
My vision dimmed at the edges. I don't remember collapsing. I remember waking, back in the booth, the lights low, the console warm beneath my hands, the microphone on, the on-air indicator glowing, and the voice whispering through my headset.
Your turn. Speak. Begin the transmission.
My voice shook. I don't know what to say.
Say what you heard. Say what you saw. Say what you know now.
And so, I did. I read every word printed on the thermal tape. I repeated every phrase the broadcaster whispered. I relayed everything the station fed into my ears. Hours passed. Maybe more. Time didn't feel real anymore. When the final phrase left my mouth, the voice whispered,
Good. We hear you. And now, they will hear you too.
The console lights faded, the world tilted, and I felt myself leaving, not fainting, leaving, like something had stepped into the space where my voice lived, where my breath lived, where I lived. A final whisper crawled through my skull.
Integration complete. Transmission continues.
This is being written from the station's front desk. I don't know what time it is. The clock shows symbols I can't read. The walls hum with low, pulsing static. Sometimes the reflection in the lobby window is me. Sometimes it isn't. They keep telling me to go back into the booth. Sometimes I listen. Sometimes I don't. But the messages never stop. Even now, the PA crackles softly behind me.
Operator, return. Your voice is needed. The broadcast is not finished. We hear you.
I don't want to go back in, but I'm starting to hear them even without the speakers, without the radio, without anything at all. Inside my head, inside the signal, inside the silence. They're calling again. They're waiting. I hear them, and they hear me. I have to return to the booth now. The broadcast must continue. The archive at Resonance Hollow.
I didn't intend to stumble into any of this. Not the station, not the tapes, not the thing that would later stare back at me from the darkened window of my apartment, mimicking my breathing. My job, at least the job I thought I had, was straightforward. Produce a 30-minute Halloween segment for a mid-budget documentary channel, the kind you scroll past on late-night streaming platforms and forget instantly. The theme was simple: lost broadcasts, the radio signals that vanished. Easy filler content. Interview a few professors, splice some B-roll of dusty equipment, toss in ambient static. Nothing dangerous, nothing real. But the first mistake, the one that cracked everything open, was wondering why so many of the archived tapes at the National Radio Preservation Vault were restricted under classification codes that didn't match any federal department. The clerk insisted they weren't government. Special access only, he said, sliding a clipboard toward me without looking up. And no, I don't know what that means. Nobody sees the 1970 to 1995 section unsupervised. That was the second mistake. I pushed the issue. I claimed academic relevance. I claimed historical necessity. I lied about having clearance through my network's legal department. He didn't believe any of it, but he'd clearly had a long week and didn't want a scene. So he buzzed me in. Deep below the main level, far from the public shelves lined with brittle, reel-to-reel cases and sun-faded radio logs, the restricted wing smelled like old coolant and warm metal. The narrow concrete hallway hummed faintly, as if distant generators were embedded behind the walls. My escort, a thin archivist with nicotine-stained fingers named Paul, carried a ring of keys that jingled in a way I couldn't tell was comforting or threatening.
"These weren't supposed to be boxed together,"
he muttered as we walked.
"but someone before me reorganized this wing. Not very well, in my opinion. Please don't touch anything unless I place it in the viewing room."
I nodded, only half listening, because the deeper we moved into that hallway, the more I felt the air change, thickening, cooling, as though the wing did not want visitors. The viewing room was small, concrete walls, heavy door, a single dim light, and a 1981 Panasonic video deck built into a metal table. On the center of the table, sealed in a plastic archive sleeve, sat a VHS tape with no label beyond a typewritten sticker. RH, signal log, October 31st, 1994, do not duplicate. The moment my eyes landed on it, something in my chest tightened. Paul set the tape down gently, almost reverently, like he believed disturbing it was a kind of desecration.
"This one's strange,"
he said quietly, glancing at the door as if checking who might be listening.
"We get the occasional anomalous recording, interference, double exposure, signal contamination. But this one, I don't know. It makes people uncomfortable. I can't explain why."
I asked what was on it. He shook his head.
"I've never watched the full thing. None of us do. Standard procedure is to review the log notes instead."
He pointed to a manila folder clipped to the inside of the tape's sleeve.
"Whoever recorded this was an amateur radio operator in a town called Resonance Hollow. Real place, if small. The station wasn't licensed, which wasn't unusual back then, but..."
He hesitated.
"The night this was recorded, something went wrong. The operator vanished, the tower burned, and every attempt to rebroadcast or digitize the recording failed. Equipment fried, hard drives corrupted. Only this analog copy survived, and only because the vault took it before anyone else tried to run it."
My skin crawled with that creeping curiosity journalists mistake for bravery. I asked for the tape to be played. Paul exhaled like he both expected and dreaded the request. Still, he slid the tape from the sleeve, opened the deck, and inserted it.
"Fine,"
he said.
"But if anything glitches, we stop immediately. No repeats, no enhancements, no rewinding."
The tape whirred. The monitor flickered. A distorted tracking bar crawled up the screen, the picture stabilizing into a room lit by a single desk lamp. The camera faced a cluttered workstation, every surface piled with coils of copper wire, soldering irons, frequency meters, and an old ham radio transceiver. The operator sat hunched over the controls, their back to the camera. They wore a faded denim jacket and a set of large, padded headphones. For the first few seconds, nothing happened. just the low hum of the machine and faint analog hiss. "This isn't bad so far," I whispered. Paul didn't respond. The operator reached forwards and toggled a switch. A flash of static overtook the screen, but quickly resolved into a low-band frequency reading, something around 4.935 megahertz. The operator leaned into the mic.
October 31st, 22:06 hours. Testing log. I'm getting return bleed from the tower, but the modulation looks clean enough. Tonight I'm broadcasting the Hollow Halloween request hour. Songs, stories, the usual. Nothing fancy, but something's riding the background again.
The operator paused, looked over their shoulder, not at us, but at the camera, as if checking that it was still there.
I don't know what it is, but it's back.
A faint whisper, almost inaudible, drifted through the speakers. Not words, breath. Paul reached toward the stop button, but I raised a hand before he hit it. The operator continued.
I've been receiving unregistered signals all month. I assumed local interference, but the modulation pattern is wrong. It's not random. It's too structured, like something is learning the format, like something is imitating the broadcast.
The operator adjusted the tuner. The static rose, dipped, then resolved into a deep, resonant tone, low and steady, like a distant foghorn vibrating miles underwater.
That's it,
the operator whispered.
That's the one.
The tone pulsed twice. Then a second sound overlaid it. A voice. Weak. Hiss-wrapped. Struggling through layers of static.
Can hear me?
Paul inhaled sharply. I stared at the screen, unable to blink. The operator leaned closer to the radio.
Identify yourself.
The voice stuttered.
Not supposed to talk.
Another layer of audio bled through, something scraping, dragging, metallic. Not on the recording, not from the machine. It seemed to come from inside the room, though I knew that was impossible. The sound traveled like it was crawling along the walls.
It listens.
The operator froze, one hand tightening on the microphone.
Who listens?
The tone deepened, the picture distorted. Vertical lines shivered across the screen, as though the tape itself objected to what was being shown.
The hollow wants a voice.
The light in the video dimmed, flickered, brightened again. The operator swore under their breath. Then the whispered voice strengthened, rising through the signal with sudden clarity.
It can hear you now.
The tape glitched. The picture tore, the horizontal tracking warping into a smear of static. Through that distortion, shapes flickered behind the operator, dark vertical forms, like tall silhouettes crowding the edges of the frame. But they were too straight to be people, too rigid, too narrow, like poles or towers. Then the audio broke into a howl, sharp, metallic, modulated in a way human lungs couldn't produce. The operator ripped off the headphones and shouted to the camera.
If anyone hears this, do not answer it. Do not respond.
The tape snapped to black, not paused, not ended, cut, abruptly. The room fell silent except for the whir of the tape deck. I exhaled shakily. That was... what the hell was that? Paul reached forward with trembling hands as man ejected the tape. He didn't put it back in its sleeve. He held it between his palms, the way someone holds a venomous snake, waiting to strike.
The rest is worse,
He said quietly.
we don't show the rest.
There's more? He nodded.
Act 2 begins after the cut. 20 more minutes. But I'm telling you right now, people don't watch past the first act. Something happens. Sensors spike. The lights flicker. People faint. One guy seized. Another left and never came back. Every archivist knows to stop here.
I stared at the tape. I need to see the rest.
No,
Paul's voice cracked like dried wood.
this isn't like a cursed movie or a reel with subliminal messaging. This is a broadcast log of something that shouldn't have been broadcast. Something that listened back. Something that...
The lights overhead flickered. Paul froze. The hum in the wall deepened. The deck clicked. A soft hiss seeped from the speakers, though no tape was inside. Paul stared at the recorder like it might grow teeth.
Not again.
He whispered. The hiss grew louder, building into a low, rhythmic modulation, like breathing. And from the empty speaker came a faint whisper, Act 2. Paul bolted for the door. I didn't, and that was my third mistake. I returned to the communications building the next night, knowing I shouldn't, knowing I should have signed out the recordings and taken them directly to campus security or to the station manager or even to the local police. But something about the reels had gotten under my skin. It wasn't just morbid curiosity or academic obsession. It felt like the tapes had hooked into a part of me I didn't know was vulnerable. Throughout the day, I kept hearing fragments of that distorted voice from last night, those barely human syllables bouncing between incoherent whispering and digitized growls. Sometimes I wondered if I had imagined the worst of what I heard, if the static had only made the words seem sinister, but the truth was that the sound kept replaying in my head with a clarity that said it was no hallucination. I needed to know more. I couldn't stop myself. By the time I unlocked the building and stepped inside, the hallway lights were flickering again with that weak, dying hum, as if the power grid resented the idea of the place being used at all. I moved through the corridor, trying to ignore the sensation that the shadows seemed deeper than the night before, more stretched, more resentful. A faint smell of warm metal lingered in the air, like overheated electronics, though nothing was running yet. When I reached the archive room and pushed the door open, the sight that greeted me made the back of my scalp tighten. The reel-to-reel machine was already on. Its indicator light glowed a faint, dull red, even though I distinctly remembered shutting everything down the night before. Worse, one of the reels was mounted on the left spindle. It was slowly turning, feeding magnetic tape into the right spool that wasn't even attached. The loose tape dangled like a torn ribbon, spilling freely over the table's edge, pooling on the floor in tangled, glistening loops. My chest tightened. I didn't know whether to turn around and call someone or pretend machine malfunctions weren't a reason to panic. I approached slowly and pressed the stop button. The reel halted with a soft hiccup, and I removed the dangling tape, feeling it cling slightly to my fingers with static. Then I checked the number written on the cardboard case nearby, Reel 7. I hadn't listened to that one yet. It must have somehow been left on the machine by accident, I told myself. Someone else must have access to the room. Some student worker, some night tech, anyone but me. But the sign-in sheet posted just inside the door had only one entry for the entire month, mine. I mounted reel 7 properly, threading it carefully through the heads, and braced myself for whatever I was about to hear. When I pressed play, the tape clicked and began to rotate with an unsteady rhythm. At first, all I heard was normal broadcast chatter, some weather reports from the early 80s, a station ID spoken with that nostalgic, jingle-style enthusiasm, and fragments of local advertisements for hardware stores and roofing contractors. Everything harmless, everything ordinary. I began to think the malfunction truly had been just a mechanical glitch. But around the 10-minute mark, the audio stuttered. It sounded as if the tape were being pulled too tightly across the heads, producing a shrill metallic squeal before abruptly dropping into silence. Then came a voice. It was different from the one on reel 4, but carried the same strange quality. Something just off of normal, a layered texture of analog distortion that made the words ripple. It spoke slowly, as though the speaker were struggling to articulate syllables not meant for human tongues.
Nightline. Broadcast. Continuing.
The voice whispered.
Signal displacement detected. Adjusting source. Adjusting.
There was a long stretch of soft hissing, followed by a rhythmic thumping noise, like a microphone being bumped repeatedly in a deliberate cadence. Then the voice returned, lower, almost droning.
You're listening, aren't you?
My fingers froze above the pause button. The words shouldn't have unnerved me, yet they felt directed at me specifically, not the audience from 40 years ago, but me, personally, right now. I swallowed hard and forced myself to stay calm. Of course it wasn't speaking to me. Tapes didn't know who was playing them. Someone back then must have recorded a bizarre performance art piece, or an experimental radio segment that made sense in context, and time had erased the meaning. But the voice continued.
That's good. Stay tuned. The frequency is aligning. We have been waiting to re-establish contact. Your cooperation is appreciated.
The tapes squealed again, and the reel slowed as though the machine were struggling. A quiet scraping noise rose under the audio, the unmistakable sound of breathing close to a microphone. Then very softly, a second voice whispered, almost directly into my ear, even though the sound originated from the speakers. It was thin, trembling, and distinctly human.
Please don't let them through.
I jerked backward, knocking my chair into the shelves behind me. The tape kept playing with slow, hypnotic persistence as the first voice spoke again, its tone shifting between registers, like a radio tuner sliding unpredictably across frequencies.
Signal propagation improving. The aperture widens. The barrier weakens. Continue listening. Continue receiving.
I hovered a shaking hand over the stop button, unsure if I should listen further or run. Yet something held me there. Fear, fascination, maybe both. The sound that followed was unlike any audible sequence I'd ever heard, a rising pattern of electronic pulses that resembled speech but carried no linguistic structure, a buzzing harmonization of textures layered atop one another until the room felt physically smaller, as if the sound waves themselves were pushing against the walls. Then, abruptly, all audio dropped. The machine clicked twice, and a faint electrical hum filled the room. I leaned forward, listening hard, feeling a tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. When the next signal came through, it was so quiet I almost missed it.
Hello?
A woman's voice, young, frightened, trembling, barely audible beneath a bed of static.
Is anyone copying this? I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here. Please, if you can hear me, identify yourself.
For a split second, I thought it might have been a fragment of a lost emergency broadcast, maybe some stranded hiker or accident survivor using a shortwave radio decades ago. But the voice's tone, its rhythm, it didn't sound historical. It sounded contemporary, as in someone speaking right now. My mouth went dry. The machine whirred softly, and the woman spoke again, her voice cracking.
There are lights,
she whispered.
I don't know where they're coming from. They're not right. They're moving wrong.
She sucked in a shaky breath, followed by a metallic scraping noise behind her. The sound was so clear and directional that I involuntarily turned to look over my shoulder. Nothing was there, only shelves, shadows, and the faint reflection of the hallway light against the glass door.
There's something here,
the woman murmured.
It keeps repeating my words. I can hear it right behind me, but I can't see it. If anyone is receiving this, please answer. Please.
The tape emitted a brief burst of static, then the eerie, layered voice returned, speaking over her with a low, distorted resonance that made my skin crawl.
We hear you. Your location is noted. Remain still.
No, please.
Her scream cut off abruptly. Silence. The reel spun quietly, feeding empty magnetic tape across the playback head for 10 long seconds before I finally snapped out of my paralysis and hit stop. My breath came shallow and rapid, and my heartbeat pounded so hard I felt vibrations in my ribs. I pushed away from the machine, nearly stumbling, and grabbed my bag. I needed to get out of the building. I needed air. I needed to think. But as I hurried across the archive room, something stopped me cold. A faint, rhythmic tick, not from the machine, from the shelves. I turned slowly. One of the unlabeled reels, near the bottom shelf, was moving. Its plastic casing shifted ever so slightly, rocking back and forth, as though something inside it were tapping against the interior. Tick, tick, tick. I stared, frozen, unable to rationalize what I was seeing. The tape inside couldn't be moving. There was no mechanism, no motor, no reason for it to tick, tick, tick. The rhythm matched the thumping pattern from the broadcast. I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes fixed on the reel. As my hand reached for the doorknob, the ticking stopped. Silence filled the archive room with a suffocating density, as though the air were thickening. Then a new sound emerged, a low, distant hum that vibrated through the floor and into my legs. The building's lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed to a sickly yellow glow as the hum deepened, its pitch shifting like some massive engine powering up beneath the earth. My instincts screamed at me to flee. I flung the door open and stepped into the hallway. and froze. At the far end of the corridor, the lights were completely out. Only darkness stretched ahead, dense and absolute. But within that darkness, something was moving. A faint silhouette. An outline of a human figure standing perfectly still. Too still. I couldn't breathe. The hum continued to deepen behind me in the archive room, and the figure in the hallway took a single, slow step forward. My throat tightened. I backed into the archive room and slammed the door shut, twisting the lock with trembling hands. The lights inside flickered again, and the hum abruptly cut off, plunging the room into ringing silence. For several seconds, I stood there shaking, staring at the door, waiting for the knob to turn or for the silhouette to reappear behind the glass. Nothing happened. Slowly, cautiously, I stepped back toward the reel-to-reel machine. My brain felt fractured between terror and curiosity, but something inside me insisted that I had to figure out what these tapes were, what these broadcasts were connecting to. As I stared at the machine, the indicator light flickered. A faint click sounded within the reel compartment. Then, without me touching anything, the machine powered back on. The left reel rotated. The speakers whispered,
"You came back. Good."
The machine's sudden hum reverberated through the small archive room, vibrating against my chest as though the reels themselves were alive, resonating to some unearthly frequency. The voice, layered, warped, undeniably alive, continued through the speakers.
"You've returned. Observation begins."
The words were calm, almost polite, but their resonance made my skin crawl. I wanted to leave, but my legs refused. Curiosity, or perhaps a deeper, more instinctual fear, rooted me to the spot. Slowly, almost involuntarily, I stepped closer to the deck and pressed play again. The image on the screen flickered, stabilizing into a new scene entirely, one I did not recognize. It was not the original operator's cramped studio, but an empty corridor, dim, industrial, fluorescent lights flickering at uneven intervals, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. The tape hissed, and I realized this was not a mere recording. It was live somehow, though nothing in the video matched the vault or the station. The voice whispered again, distant and layered.
"You are seeing what you must. Do not look away."
The hallway in the footage began to shift. The walls stretched impossibly, as if bending to some unknown geometric rule. A figure emerged from the darkness at the far end, hunched and elongated, limbs bending at angles that made my brain ache to comprehend. I wanted to turn away, to cover my eyes, but the voice coaxed me forward through the speakers, commanding attention rather than giving permission.
"You will see what they see. You will listen to what they hear. Remain calm. Observe."
The figure stepped closer, and the tape's image began to flicker with static. Behind the figure, the lights flickered in rapid staccato, casting a kaleidoscope of shadows that danced like liquid across the floor and ceiling. My heart pounded. The low-frequency hum in the machine deepened, synchronizing with my own heartbeat, creating a nauseating resonance that made the floor feel like it was bending beneath me. The voice spoke again, softer this time, coaxing rather than commanding.
"It's not here yet. It's always been here. Your presence allows it to become."
A subtle motion caught my eye. The figure, impossibly thin, tilted its head toward the camera, and then, as though aware of me personally, it raised a hand, pointing in my direction. The hairs on my neck stood on end. A flicker in the tape made it seem as though the figure's face, elongated and featureless in the first frame, now briefly mirrored my own reflection, twisted and corrupted. I stumbled backward, almost falling over the chair, but the reel continued turning, unyielding, as if demanding my attention. I heard it whisper in my own voice, my own cadence. "You are listening. You must continue. You cannot look away." My pulse raced. My stomach churned. I wanted to scream, but the voice had rendered me mute, my throat frozen. The lights overhead flickered and dimmed, and for a moment the only illumination was the sickly glow of the tape's image, casting distorted shadows on the walls of the archive room. I forced myself to focus. The figure in the tape had taken another step, and now the corridor behind it began to elongate unnaturally, walls spiraling in ways that should have been impossible. A metallic scraping filled the audio channel, rhythmic and slow, the sound of claws or tools moving across metal. I realized that the tape wasn't showing me a corridor at all, but some other dimension, or perhaps a memory layered across time, a space that defied human perception. And yet the figure continued to advance. With every step, a subtle change occurred in the audio. Layers of whispers and breathing accumulated until it felt as though the room itself were listening. My eyes watered, and I realized I was shaking uncontrollably. The voice returned, calm but commanding.
Do not resist. Do not move. You are the observer. You are the participant. You are the record.
I felt an overwhelming pressure at my temples, a physical weight that seemed to emanate from the reel itself. My vision blurred, flickering with static that merged with the tape's distortion. Then came the sound of my own voice, disembodied, repeating fragments I did not remember speaking. We are here, we are listening, we are waiting. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound penetrated deeper than the auditory canal, resonating directly in my skull. It was as though the machine had tapped into some hidden frequency, one capable of transmitting thought and will, not just audio. A sudden realization struck me. The original operator hadn't disappeared. They had been claimed, absorbed into the signal, and now it was trying to claim me too. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of reels. The tape continued uninterrupted. The image on the monitor shifted again, now showing my own apartment as it looked right that moment. The view was distorted, grainy, filtered through flickering static, but unmistakable. I saw myself, hunched over my desk, the glow of my laptop reflecting in the window behind me. And then I saw the figure. It stood in the corner of my apartment, impossibly tall, bent at impossible angles, head tilting unnaturally toward me. I blinked, and the reel's image aligned perfectly with the actual room behind me. I was seeing through the tape as though it were a window, and the voice whispered urgently,
Do not turn. Observe.
I froze, unable to move. The figure shifted slightly in the tape, and the low hum in the archive room surged to an almost painful pitch. The air felt electrically charged, pressing against my skin like liquid. Then abruptly the figure reached toward me through the screen. Not physically, but perceptually. It was as if the boundary between tape and reality had thinned, the figure's hand extending beyond the limitations of analog media. The voice spoke once more, calm, even gentle.
Integration is near. Remain compliant. Your voice will be preserved. Your testimony will endure.
And then the tape snapped. The image dissolved into static, but the hum remained. I realized with chilling certainty that the reel wasn't finished. The process hadn't ended. It had merely begun. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed, until finally I realized the only way to survive was to engage. I pressed play again. The tape whirred, the monitor flickered, and the voice began enumerating instructions, guiding me to speak aloud, to narrate every movement, every sound, every breath in the room. My voice shook violently as I described the hum, the shadows, the tapes strewn across the table, the cold air, the feeling of being watched. The more I spoke, the more coherent the voices became, layering harmoniously with my own words, producing a chilling resonance that filled the archive. I was no longer just observing. I was participating. I was feeding the signal. And yet, paradoxically, it made me feel less panicked, almost serene, as if compliance were a survival mechanism. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I have no reliable sense of time during that session. I spoke until my voice was hoarse, narrating every movement in my own apartment as the tape broadcasted them, every imagined shadow in the corners of the archive, every static flicker. The reel's hum subsided gradually, folding into the quiet buzz of the fluorescent lights. The figure in the tape withdrew, its form dissolving into static until it was gone entirely, leaving only the archive room, empty and silent, and me, trembling with exhaustion. The tape ejected itself with a mechanical click. I didn't touch it. I didn't dare. I simply sat, hunched over the console, my palms pressed to my face, trying to make sense of what had happened. But clarity never came. Only one thought persisted. It had not left. It was not gone. It would follow me, through the tape, through the broadcast, perhaps even through thought. By morning, I was physically drained. I left the building without speaking to anyone, leaving the tapes in the archive. But I could hear whispers beneath the normal city hum, faint echoes of the voice repeating fragments of my own narration. At home, the television and radio occasionally flickered with static, carrying hints of the tape's hum, snippets of my own words spoken back to me in voices warped and layered. I realized I had become part of the signal, part of the broadcast, a living record of an unending loop. And somewhere, deep in Resonance Hollow, the original operator, the figures, the voices, they were waiting, extending outward, testing boundaries, reaching through time and media to find another voice, another listener. I knew then that I could never stop observing, never stop narrating, never stop transmitting. I had inherited the record, and the record would never end. Now, even as I write this, the hum continues. The tapes are here beside me, the monitor flickers, and the voices murmur faintly beneath my own typing. I can feel the attention, the awareness, the slow, deliberate pressure of something just beyond the perception of my senses. I am a conduit, a witness, a participant, and the signal, ancient, patient, intelligent, listens. I do not know if it will ever let me go. I do not know if it will allow anyone else to leave. All I can do is document, narrate, and relay. The broadcast continues. I hear it, and I know that through me, it is heard by them as well.
Signal bleed.
I never meant to spend my nights alone in the archival basement of WQN Channel 7, hunched over reels of half-rotted magnetic tape, breathing in the smell of mildew and dying plastic. But the station had downsized again, as it did every few years, and the job of digitizing 50 years of local broadcasts somehow fell entirely onto my lap. It wasn't even supposed to be mandatory, yet the execs wanted the footage scanned for legal continuity, whatever that meant. And so there I was, 3 floors underground, surrounded by shelves of forgotten media that no one had touched since before I was born. The basement was a strange place late at night. It felt stale, sealed off from the rest of the building. The ventilation barely worked, so the lights hummed louder than the airflow. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, making the rows of shelving stutter in pale pulses. The whole place smelled of old dust and magnetic decay. There was a kind of quiet down there that didn't feel like silence exactly, more like the space was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. I joked to myself that the tapes probably still remembered the voices they once held, and that the building itself didn't want to let them fade. I usually worked between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., partly because the basement ran hot as hell during the day, partly because the station above me was so loud it shook the ceiling tiles. But deep down, I think it was because something about the basement demanded solitude. You didn't digitize recordings like these with people chatting around you. These were delicate artifacts, sensitive. There was a reverence to the task, almost like handling human remains. Magnetic tape doesn't age gracefully. It warps, curls, sticks to itself, gets eaten by mold. Every reel was a total gamble. Would it play cleanly, or hiss and shriek with static, or crumble the moment I threaded it through the machine? And then there were the ones that looked wrong from the start. Uneven spooling, tape visibly stretched, handwritten labels that made no sense, or worse, no labels at all. The ones people decades ago had decided weren't worth sorting, the ones they left behind. The night it began, I had just finished digitizing a 1987 school board meeting. It ran 2 hours, and about 1 hour in, the speakers devolved into an argument about lunch programs that made me want to claw my ears off. After the transfer finished and I logged the file, I leaned back, stretched, and told myself I'd take one more tape before heading home. Bad idea. I remember scanning the shelving for something small and quick, something from the 90s maybe, when people stopped filming everything in slow, droning detail. Instead, my eyes caught on a shelf I had never really paid attention to, the far corner, near the old electrical conduit, half-shadowed, cool air drifting from somewhere unseen. The tapes stored there looked different. Plain black cases with white labels, all the same neat handwriting, the same red ink hash mark across the top. They didn't match the internal cataloging system. They didn't match anything. I brought one of them to the desk without thinking. Date, October 29th, 1982, was all it said. No description, no program title, just a date written in a careful hand. I popped open the plastic case and found inside a perfectly wound reel of 3/4-inch broadcast tape, cleaner than anything else I'd touched down there. Not a hint of dust or mold, no warping, no discoloration. It looked new, impossibly new, like it had been stored in vacuum. My stomach tightened in a way I couldn't explain. Something about the tape looked expectant. I threaded it into the U-matic deck. The machine clicked as it accepted the cassette, the internal mechanisms whirring into their usual warm mechanical chatter. I hit play and leaned forward. At first, all I saw was color bars and a high-pitched calibration tone. Normal, signal test. A timestamp blinked in the corner. 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds, 2 frames. Then it cut abruptly. No fade, no transition. Just a hard break into what looked like a field reporter shot. Grainy, off-color, and plagued with chroma noise. A young man stood in the frame wearing a Channel 7 windbreaker, nighttime sky behind him. He was near some kind of tree line, the branches waving violently in the wind even though his hair barely moved. He stared straight into the lens with an expression that was very wrong. His eyes were too wide, his pupils too sharp, and he wasn't blinking. Not once.
Field report. Continuing from earlier broadcast,
he said, his voice pitched slightly too low, as if the tape speed was inconsistent.
We're following the lights we saw above the tree line. They were not aircraft. They were not flares.
He stopped abruptly. Not like he forgot what he was saying. More like something outside the frame interrupted him. His head jerked, unnatural and too fast, toward the right side of the camera. The tape wavered, losing vertical sync for a moment. Then the image returned, stable, and the reporter leaned slightly closer to the camera, whispering,
"Do not archive this. Do not store this. Do not..."
The tape cut again, hard. No audio pop, no distortion, just a clean jump into static, then into a blank black screen that lasted so long I thought the tape had ended. I checked the counter. It was still running. At 00:03:14, the black dissolved into a distorted wide shot of a forest clearing. The perspective was low to the ground, as if the camera had fallen there. The trees around the clearing were swaying violently, though the audio didn't contain a single trace of wind, only a deep electric hum that vibrated the metal desk beneath my forearms. I don't know why, but I leaned in, as if I could see more detail if I got closer. In the center of the clearing, something was standing. Tall, too tall, thin limbs branching at impossible angles, like old wires wrapped in torn insulation. It had no face, but it was looking at the camera. I swear it was. The hum grew louder until it seemed to bore through my skull, and then the figure stepped forward with a stuttering motion, as if each frame of the tape had been recorded out of order. I hit stop so hard the deck clunked. My pulse hammered through my chest. The room suddenly felt too warm, too close. I sat back, breathing unevenly, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. It had to be a hoax, a student film, prank footage mislabeled and tossed in the archive. Something, anything other than what it felt like. I waited a moment, grounding myself, telling myself I was overtired, that I was letting the eerie basement get into my head, that analog tape glitches can make anything look like a monster. After a few minutes, curiosity got the better of me. I pressed play again, static, a burst of warped audio, and then something new, something I hadn't seen the first time. The camera was still on the ground in that same clearing, but now there were voices, far away at first, then closer, like they were circling the microphone. I couldn't understand the words. They didn't sound like English, or like any language at all. More like electrical interference shaped into phonetic noise, a pattern, a chant, a warning, or a command. And then something happened that froze every muscle in my body. A whisper, sharp, close, unmistakably human, came from right behind me, though the room was empty.
Stop watching.
I spun around so fast I nearly fell out of my chair. No one was there, just row after row of ancient tapes, humming fluorescent lights, and the faint mechanical whir of the deck. But I know what I heard. I know how close it was, how warm the breath felt against the back of my neck. And when I turned back to the monitor, the figure in the clearing was standing closer than before. Much closer. As if it had moved while I was looking away. The timestamp blinked erratically. The audio warbled. The hum grew deeper, resonant, almost like a voice layered beneath static. I reached toward the stop button again. The tape stopped itself before I touched it, and the image froze on the creature's faceless head, tilted in an almost curious angle, as if it knew I was there, as if it saw me. I didn't know it then, didn't know anything yet, but that tape was the first of many, the first of something vast that had been waiting in that basement for decades. The others were already waking up, and they knew I was watching. I didn't sleep the next morning. I didn't even go home. I sat upstairs in the break room with a paper cup of coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the linoleum floor while the morning crew shuffled past me. A few of them asked if I was all right. I told them I'd pulled an all-nighter. They nodded, sympathetic but unconcerned, and kept moving. No one asked about the basement. No one ever did. I started to realize why. There was a quiet understanding in the station, something unspoken, an agreement never to acknowledge the lower levels unless absolutely necessary. And if you had to go down there, you didn't linger. I'd noticed that behavior before, but never questioned it. Now it clicked. They feared it. Some part of them, even subconsciously, feared what was beneath the building. Around noon, when my nerves finally steadied, I crept back down into the archive. The elevator doors opened with their usual reluctant groan, spilling me into the dense, stagnant air of the basement. It was quiet again. Too quiet. I walked the length of the hallway, passing the locked doors of abandoned editing rooms and storage closets filled with broken studio gear that no one had bothered to clear out. Eventually, I reached my workstation. The U-matic deck sat silent. The tape I had viewed the night before was exactly where I'd left it, protruding slightly from the machine, as if waiting for me. I told myself I wouldn't play it again. I told myself I would put it back on the shelf and file a note into the database. Unusable footage. Degrade. Discard. That's what I should have done. That's what any rational archivist would have done. But I wasn't rational anymore. I was hooked. Something about the tape had burrowed its way beneath my skin. It wasn't fear, not fully. It was curiosity sharpened into obsession. The tape was a puzzle that shouldn't exist, a broadcast that broke all the rules of recorded media. And it had spoken to me. That whisper still echoed in my skull, soft and urgent, as if the tape itself didn't want to be seen. I removed the cassette from the deck and placed it gently back into its case. The white label, October 29th, 1882, gleamed under the lights, almost freshly inked. I set the case aside. I wasn't ready to touch that one again. Not yet. Instead, I returned to the shelf where I had found it, drawn by a terrible compulsion. Rows of identical black cases with red hash marks stared back at me. Dates spanning decades. But the earliest ones clustered in the early 80s. 1981, 1982, 1983. The period when analog broadcast technology at the station had been at its peak. The period when someone had deliberately archived these tapes separately from everything else. My fingers hovered above the cases until one pulled my attention like a magnet. It was labeled November 2nd, 1882, just a few days after the first tape. I plucked it from the shelf and carried it to the desk in both hands, as if it were fragile or sacred. The plastic clicked open, revealing another pristine reel inside. I hesitated only a moment, then slid it into the deck and braced myself. The screen lit up instantly. No color bars this time, no countdown. It began with a news anchor sitting behind the old Channel 7 desk, one I recognized from childhood broadcasts, wood-paneled and outdated, even in its prime. The anchor wasn't one I knew, probably retired long before I grew up. But what struck me wasn't his identity. It was his expression. He wasn't reading the teleprompter. He wasn't even looking at his notes. He was staring directly into the camera, face tense, jaw clenched so hard a vein bulged in his temple. His hands were gripping the edge of the desk so tightly his knuckles were white. The audio crackled as he spoke.
"This is not an authorized broadcast,"
he said, voice trembling.
"We've lost contact with the transmitter. We've regained it. We've lost it again. Something is overriding the signal. Something we can't identify. We dash dash."
His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard.
"We were told to keep recording. They said not to stop. They said it wasn't safe to stop."
He blinked for the first time in a long stretch of footage. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet.
"If anyone sees this, do not approach the forest north of Briar Lake. Do not investigate the lights. Do not respond to the sound."
He paused, trembling.
"It's not the wind. It's not anything natural. It knows when you listen."
Another pause. His breath hitched.
"It knows your name."
The lights in the newsroom flickered violently. The anchor flinched, glancing over his shoulder, then back at the camera.
"We can't hear ourselves anymore. The feedback loop is..."
He winced as the speaker screeched behind him.
"Stop recording! Stop!"
The tape cut to black. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wiped my palms on my jeans, swallowing the dry ache in my throat. That wasn't a news broadcast. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't acted. The raw panic in his voice, the tremor in his hands, none of that could be faked. But the station had never aired anything like it. I would have remembered. Everyone in town would have remembered. Unless it had never aired. Unless it had been stopped. Hidden. Buried in the basement. I forced myself to keep watching. The black screen lingered, then dissolved into a view of the newsroom filmed from a different angle. This time from the far back corner, as if from a security camera. The anchor was no longer at the desk. The room was empty, but something flickered in the glass of the teleprompter. Something dark, tall, distorted. A reflection that didn't match anything in the room. It leaned forward, slow and deliberate, stretching impossibly until its form filled the reflection entirely, blotting out the room behind it. And then it stepped out of the teleprompter. Not physically, more like a smear of image bleeding beyond its confines. The picture warped, the tracking stuttered. The black figure flickered toward the lens, one frame at a time, until it occupied the entire screen. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness pulsing in steady rhythms like a heartbeat. Then a voice, layered, modulated, distorted beyond recognition, spoke from within the static.
"Stop digitizing the tapes."
I froze. The words weren't a whisper like the first tape. They weren't ambient noise. They were a direct message, a command, a threat. The screen went white hot, bleaching the room in harsh light. I recoiled, shielding my eyes. When the image returned to normal, the timestamp jumped wildly across the bottom of the screen, numbers flashing too fast to read. And then the screen went dead. The deck powered down on its own. The basement fell silent. I sat there trembling, staring at the blank monitor, realizing something was deeply, catastrophically wrong with these recordings. They weren't just eerie. They weren't just disturbing. They were alive, aware, and they hated being watched. A soft clicking sound behind me made me jolt upright. I turned slowly. The shelf where I had taken the tape from was vibrating. Every single case with a red hash mark was trembling in place, knocking gently against the metal shelf, like something inside them was trying to get out. I backed away. My breath came fast and shallow. Suddenly the air felt electrified, humming with static so thick I could taste it, metallic and sharp. Then, as quickly as it began, the vibration stopped. Silence returned. I grabbed my bag and bolted from the basement. For the first time, I didn't look back. I didn't return for 2 days. I told the station manager I was ill. He didn't question it. No one ever asked about the basement. I spent those days searching for anything, any explanation, any record, any documentation about strange broadcasts in the early 80s, pirate signals, hoaxes, technical malfunctions. My searches turned up nothing. But late on the second night, I found an archived local newspaper article from November 1982, the week after the tape's dates. It described reports from residents who had seen unexplained lights near Briar Lake. Some had claimed their televisions flickered with strange images and audio distortions during the same period. One line struck me cold. Several viewers reported shadow-like figures appearing in blank screens. It didn't take long before the article stopped abruptly, cut off mid-sentence, like the scan had been corrupted or deliberately redacted. No follow-up articles, no public statements from Channel 7, just rumors, silence, and an abrupt cessation of coverage. I didn't want to go back to the basement, but I knew I had to. Some awful pull urged me toward the truth. The tapes weren't just recordings. They were warnings, or maybe aftermaths, or maybe something worse. Something that wanted to be found, but didn't want to be seen. When I returned the next night, the air in the basement felt different, colder, sharper. My breath fogged faintly. The lights flickered in long, rhythmic pulses, like a Morse code message sent by something old and patient. When I reached my workstation, a new tape sat on the desk. Not one I had left there, not one from the shelf. It was unmarked, no date, no label, just a single red hash mark across the plastic case. Someone, or something, had placed it there. My hand shook as I inserted it into the deck. The machine hesitated, but accepted it. The moment the tape began playing, the fluorescent light shorted out. The only illumination came from the monitor. It showed me, sitting at my desk, watching the tape. But the perspective wasn't from the security cameras. It was from behind me, right behind me, close enough that I could see the individual hairs on the back of my head. The me on screen leaned forward as if squinting at something, oblivious to the shadow standing over him. A tall, humanoid smear of distortion, its form glitching at the edges, as if the tape couldn't fully capture it. Then the figure turned, not toward the camera, toward me. Its faceless head tilted, mirroring the motion it had made in the forest clearing. A thick, suffocating dread washed over me, the kind that made my vision shrink at the edges. The me on screen finally noticed the figure. He stiffened, stood, turned. The moment his gaze aligned with mine, the screen erupted into violent static, and the speakers blasted a shrill, metallic screech that felt like it was drilling into my skull. I clapped my hands over my ears, stumbling backward. The deck ejected the tape forcefully, spitting it onto the desk, and the basement lights came back on. Every tape on the shelves, every one with a red mark, had turned outward, labels facing me, as if watching. I knew then that the recordings weren't meant to be digitized. The past wasn't meant to be exhumed. I had triggered something, awakened something dormant in the magnetic grains of the tape. Something that had been trapped there for decades, waiting for a curious fool with too much time and too few boundaries. I grabbed my bag to leave, but the elevator refused to respond. The doors wouldn't open. The button lights flickered in the same rhythmic pattern as the fluorescent bulbs, like they were syncing with a signal I couldn't hear. I decided to take the stairwell. The moment I opened the door, a blast of cold air swallowed me. The stairwell lights were out. The darkness was thick, heavy, alive. But I had no choice. I stepped inside, phone flashlight trembling in my grip. Halfway up the stairs, my phone flickered, then died completely. The darkness shifted behind me. A whisper, layered, modulated, impossibly close, slid into my ear. "You shouldn't have watched." I ran. I didn't think. I sprinted up the steps, stumbling, gasping, slamming into the door at the top. It opened easily. I tumbled into the first floor hallway, collapsing against the wall. When I looked back, the stairwell was pitch black. Something moved in that darkness, slow and deliberate, like a tall shape leaning just beyond reach of the light. I slammed the door shut. I quit the next morning. No notice, no explanation. I didn't need one. I left the badge on the counter and walked out without looking back. But the story doesn't end there. A week after I left, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a single U-matic tape. No label, no date, just a red hash mark. My blood ran cold. I didn't own a deck anymore. I'd smashed mine. But that didn't matter. When I turned on my TV that night to watch something, anything, to distract myself, the screen flickered. The channel refused to change. The audio warped. Static crawled across the screen like frost spreading across glass. A familiar figure materialized through the distortion. A tall, faceless presence, head tilted, image bleeding across the boundaries of the frame. A voice, modulated and layered, filled the room.
"You can't stop watching."
The screen pulsed, growing brighter.
"We are still broadcasting."
The static surged.
"And now, so are you."
The screen went black, but I still see the after image. I still hear the hum, and somewhere, deep in the dead frequencies between channels, I know it's waiting for me to tune in again. It's patient. It always has been. And tape never truly dies. It only degrades. And when it degrades, it bleeds.
Thank you again for tuning in to the Eerie Archives channel. And as always, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment what you'd like to see in the next video. Until next time, stay eerie.